Okay, welcome to So You Think You Know Your Onions. Hopefully today I will prove that you don't, because onions are amazing and people don't think of them that way, but hopefully after today, maybe you will. The French have a saying, and I'm going to mangle this because I am, not a linguist. Ce n'est pas tes oignons, which translates to, it's not your onions, or mind your own business. And this has sort of come down through French Canada into New England and the East Coast. And there's an expression there saying, he really knows his onions, when someone, knows his onions, when he's really knowledgeable about a certain thing. So onions, I think, are everyone's business because they're so ubiquitous in almost all of our cuisines. The only cuisine that I found that did not contain onions was indigenous Arctic Circle natives. And it's because they can't really grow onions up there. So, but everyone else, we got them down here. So the onion has been with us for almost as long as cultivation, farming, and settled lifestyle for humans. It's been with us so long that our normal storage onion, our bulb onion, our yellow onion, doesn't have a wild ancestor. It's so domesticated that there's nothing left of it in the wild. There are wild onions, but they're not, they're related, but they're not our onions. Onions go back far. We see them in Mesopotamia. We read about them in Mesopotamia. We see them in ancient Egypt on tomb paintings where they're being offered to the gods or the pharaoh. In ancient Greece, athletes used to drink onion juice to pep themselves up. And I will get more into that as we go on in the class. Onions are unmatched for versatility. We use them as a vegetable, we use them as an herb, we use them as a spice, we use them in medicine, and there's even one dessert which I have not tried, but they do make garlic ice cream for the Gilroy Garlic Festival every year. They can be used fresh or dried, and but they're seldom the main ingredient. But everyone likes onions. Well, most everyone likes onions, or they wouldn't be so ubiquitous in our cuisine. Few people love onions. I love them, not necessarily to eat. I do like to eat them, but I love them as a plant because I've studied them so much. But few people really hate onions. My brother had a cat who loved onions, so everyone likes them. They've been called the world's favorite secret ingredient because a lot of times you don't even know they're there, but you'd miss them if they weren't. Onions have a way, not only have a way of making things taste better, but they also have a way of stimulating the appetite. And when I say onions, I mean onions and garlic, and we are going to talk about garlic in this class as well. I'm not a breakfast person. Literally, I cannot eat in the mornings. But as I was leaving for work one day, one of my neighbors was cooking something in garlic, and all of a sudden I was starving just from one whiff. We would miss onions. We'd miss their crunchiness on our hot dogs and in our salsas. We'd miss red onions on our hamburgers. We miss them as a topping to most meats. We miss them caramelized, in soups. We would miss our leeks, especially me. We'd have no vichyssoise. And like I said, someone might even miss the garlic ice cream at the festival. And also, where would green bean casserole be without the French fried onions? So onions are among the easiest vegetables to grow and also to cook. The first century Roman cook Apicius mentions them, and Galen, the Greek physician writing about first century AD, mentions them a lot. I was hoping he'd have something snarky to say about them so I could give you a quote in the class, but mostly he just, likes them and, says, you cook this like you would cook onions. So not particularly noteworthy, but they're there. Let's see, what else do we have here? But there's also, in addition to tantalizing our taste buds, onions tantalize our brains. And at the end of this class, I'm going to tell you onions' deepest, darkest secrets. So you will be able to know them as well. You'll never be intimidated by an onion today. So what we are going to do is we are going to meet our alums. That's the family that onions belong to. Oh, and I don't know if you can see this very well, but I have this beautiful basket of various types of onions here. And there'll be a picture of that in the handout, which, by the way, is not going to be available for a week or two because I'm not finished writing it. I had to write it at work and I had to actually work at work. So this is our basic onion. This is Allium cepa, C-E-P-A. And it is a storage onion, a Spanish onion, a brown onion, a yellow onion. But it is, in North America, the ubiquitous onion. When it says, add an onion, this is the onion you add. So we also have the white onion. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to show you the label. The white onion. And the white onion is used more in Mexican cooking than it is in American cooking. It's a little sharper, a little crisper, a little cleaner. And it's very popular, as I said, south of the US border. But this onion is also Allium cepa. So they are the same thing. And then we have the red onion, which is sweeter and juicier and easier to eat raw. And it's also Allium cepa. So we have our three cepas, and they're all the same thing. They're just different, what they call cultivars, which, they're all the same species, but they're different breeds, like dogs. This is a sweet onion. They tend to be flatter, but not always. It has its stem up here. I don't know if this is a Walla Walla or a, or if it is a Vidalia, but there's a number of different sweet onions. This one just says it's a sweet onion from Mexico. I was telling people earlier that it's not really the time of year for me to teach this class because onions aren't coming out yet here, but they are down south. So that's why this one's from Mexico. Anyways, this onion, which, by the way, doesn't have more sugar than a regular onion. It just has less sulfur, which makes it sweet. I mean, I'm told that you can eat this like an apple, but I haven't tried it and I'm not going to today. But it is also a cepa. Oops, a cepa. So believe it or not, we all are cepas here so far. This little guy is a cipollini. And they are fun for roasting and just really good flavor. And it's a seppa. And then we have our tiny little pearl onions. I can only get red ones this time of year. I did look for white ones. They come in white and yellow as well. And it too is a seppa. So we have all these onions and they're all the same species. They're just different cultivars, but they're very different. Saffron, get over. Sorry, I have a kitten who's very interested in my onions, so I keep having to shoo her away. So let me turn the page in my notes. This is a shallot. It is, where are you, shallot? Allium esculenticum, which esculentum is where our word succulent comes from. It is torpedo shaped. It is reddish on the inside, and it also has a tendency to split inside its own peel. So sometimes you'll peel it and there'll be like a seam and it'll just come apart into two, which makes it very handy for slicing and dicing because you have a nice flat surface. Some people think that this too is a seppa. I saw it listed as seppa at, I'm so bad at Latin, aggregatum. So, you know, I am not a botanist, so I don't know, but there you go. Okay. So, well, we have a lot of seppas and maybe seppas. And the beauty of onions, or seppas especially, is that in addition to our bulbs, we can eat these at various stages of growth. This is a green onion. It's also called a spring onion, or sometimes a scallion, depending on where you're from. And believe it or not, this too is a seppa. It is a baby this. And the reason we have them, in addition to them both being delicious, is the fact that onion seeds are really, really small. I mean, itsy bitsy tiny. And to grow onions and to make them set a bulb like this, they need space. And if we had to separate those itty bitty seeds and plant each one 6 inches apart, it would be really hard. So what we do is we dig a trench, we sprinkle the seeds in and let them all sprout. And then we pull them out as they sprout, and we eat them as green onions. They're called spring onions because they are among the earliest vegetables that are edible in the spring. And they're called scallions because no one is really sure. Some people think that scallions comes from the word shallot and that they get mixed up in recipes. People just don't know. It might come from Middle English, from the French word, or the Anglo-French word, scallion. And again, I can't speak Middle English or Middle French very well. Based on Ascalonia, which is Latin, which also is kind of it means onion of the city of Ascalon. So that was a port in Palestine. So maybe that's where the Romans got their onions from. I don't know at this point. So this is our green onion, and it is a baby seppa. And we just pull them. If you see really thin ones, they've been pulled early. If you see nice fat ones like this, they've been pulled later. And if you see these wonderful Mexican bulb onions, which are falling apart, like that too is a seppa. It's a green onion, It's been picked later as the bulb is starting to set. And these are great grilled. So those are our cepas, but we're not done with our alums yet. We have garlic. This is our small but mighty onion cousin. It is pungent and breath destroying when it's raw, but it becomes mild and sweet when it's cooked. That's why we like to roast our garlic, because it's nummy that way. I tend to snack on it when it's roasted. Garlic comes in two forms, and I only have one form to show you, unfortunately. It comes in soft neck and hard neck types. This is the soft neck, and you can't really tell, but this, when it's a little bit less dry and a little longer, is very flexible. And these are the ones that you see braided into those pretty wreaths. And they braid them like that because they need to cure, but I'll get to curing in just a second. And this is the kind you most likely see in the markets and the farmers markets. Some of the more exotic varieties, like that red garlic that they like for Mexican cooking, is what they call a hardneck variety. And this stem on them is very, very hard. I mean, literally, you couldn't braid it if you tried. And also you can see, I don't know if you can, hopefully you could see that this bulb of garlic has lots of little sections. The sections are what's called the clove. And I'm not sure why. It really has nothing to do with like clove, the spice. And the hardneck varieties tend to have just 4 of these gathered around the stem. Sometimes they just have one big clove, but those are the hardneck varieties. The softneck varieties are the multiple cloves. There's a little interest point. If you want to know whether your garlic is from the United States or whether it's imported, look at the roots. This one doesn't have very many roots. This one has a few roots on it. If there's roots, it's a local garlic. If there are no roots, if it's totally trimmed, it comes from outside the United States. Apparently there is some sort of disease or parasite that is on the roots of onions that the USDA does not want in our country, so they have to cut them off. They can, they can import the onion, but they just can't import the roots. So going on, we have my favorite alum, and also the Welsh favorite alum, the leek. Leek's Latin name is Alum porum, and porum possibly is the root of our word porridge or puree, because leeks ended up in a lot of them. Now, leeks, as you may or may not know, are really dirty. I mean, this one's clean on the outside, of course, but if you cut it open, they are really dirty. And the reason for that is this white and light green area. This is the part that gets eaten for them. I'm going to say this is the part that gets eaten because these leaves are really tough. And they want as much of that as possible. So as the leek sprouts, and I'm assuming it sprouts in a more compact form than what we see here, they build up dirt around it and keep this covered and get as much white and light green as possible. And they keep piling up the dirt as far as they think it can go. Sometimes we get leeks that are white, and green up to this point. But in the meantime, all that dirt gets inside the leek. So it's very important that you wash your leeks thoroughly. And also, believe it or not, like kale, it is easier to chop your leeks first and wash them afterwards. The dirt comes off much easier. And our final onion of the day is that little perennial favorite, chives. Chives are the one alum that is pretty much strictly used as an herb. It is minced and sprinkled on everything. There are no real chive recipes, although there's recipes for Chinese chives, which we know as garlic chives. They are, couldn't find any, or I would have brought some in for you. The stems are flatter and meatier, I guess you'd call it, than our regular chives. And chives' Latin name is Alum shonapraxum. Okay, so before I leave, I'm going to add a little onion science here. Getting back to our ubiquitous seppa. The thing about seppas is that they rely on the length of days to set their bulbs. So somehow the leaves can tell time. When the days are long enough, they will start setting their bulbs. So when you buy onion seeds, you need to buy them specifically for your area, because days get longer the further north you go, and the onions set their bulbs at a different rate. So that is one little interesting onion factoid that you can amaze your friends with. Okay, so now we're going to get into some onion history. Wait, let me just make sure there's no more science that I need to go over with you. Nope. There is something in existence. It's called the Yale tablets. They are Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets that have recipes on them. And recipes, oh, you know what? I did forget to tell you, there are wild onions. There's also ornamental onions, like the giant onion blossom that you see in some gardens. And then also what is very common here in Southern California, the society garlic, which is a plant that has a very garlicky smell. They use it to keep deer and pests out of the garden. So I'm sorry, back to the Yale tablets. They have recipes on them, and the recipes are mostly for stews and things, and they all are heavily flavored with onions and leeks. In fact, the French historian Jean Berthelot, who first translated them, calls onion the characteristic ingredient of the cuisine. So there's 25 broths or porridges, and 21 were meat or fowl based, and 4 were vegetable based, and they all feature onions, garlic, and leeks. Okay. And I mentioned ancient Egypt. They ate onions because onions are good to, they're fast to grow, they're cheap to grow, they're easy to grow, and people like them. In fact, a laborer's pay might be, he might be paid in bread and onions. Or if he's, laboring for a fee and, his meals are included, that might be his lunch, is bread and onions. They show onions in tomb paintings, as I mentioned earlier, being offered up. And they also seem to be fascinated by the layers. Everyone knows that our onion has layers, and they, the Egyptians seem to consider this to be a model of the universe, where, the layers of different things. So, but I don't think they worshipped onions. I'm not an expert, but it's just my opinion. They just, thought they were cool. And because they were among the first harvestable vegetables, they got offered to the gods because they were there. And besides which, if they liked eating onions, they figured their gods did too. They were very anthropomorphic religion. We get on to the part that we're really interested in. That's the medieval and Renaissance use of onions. Onions are, like I said earlier, they can be used as a vegetable because they're nice and juicy, but they can also be used as medicine. When they get cooked, they get very soft and they make like a good base for ointments and things to be spread on the skin. They have antiseptic qualities. They have antibiotic qualities. Just by feeling them, you can once they're soft, everything. I mean, they're still acidic and they feel like they're doing something when they're applied to the skin. I read somewhere, and I can't find the reference, unfortunately, that a roasted onion was used for hemorrhoids. I don't know how effective it was. Probably felt pretty good, but it was used for all sorts of things. I'm surprised that my favorite author from the period, Eleanor Fettiplace, doesn't mention onions once, not in her culinary recipes and not in her medicinal recipes, which surprises me. I'm sure she had onions and cooked onions and ate onions and probably even used them as medicine, but she never mentions them. Maybe she thought they weren't ladylike. I don't know. The herbalists certainly mention them. Gerard says they are hot and dry, which is the humor theory, and they bite and cause dryness. Being boiled, they do lose their sharpness, especially if the water be twice or thrice changed, and yet for all, they do not use their attenuating quality, and that's the bite part. I mean, it softens, but it never really goes away. The onion being eaten, he says, yea, though it be boiled, causes headache, hurteth the eyes, and maketh the man dim-sighted, dulleth the senses, and provoketh overmuch sleep, especially being eaten raw. So I have a couple of recipes that I will share with you in the handout. Onions very seldom get star billing in our modern cuisine, except for like in French onion soup. But they do have some wonderful recipes for onions in our period. And again, they're not usually the main event, but they are the only vegetable that's ever cooked with meat. All other vegetables are cooked separately. The Good Housewife's Jewel has a recipe, and I'm going to put these in the handout, and with also the books I got these out have a modern redaction that I'll include as well. To boil onions, take a good many onions and cut them in 4 quarters. Set them on the fire in as much water as you think will boil them tender. And when they be clean, skinned, and put in, skinned and put in a good many raisins, half a spoonful of gross pepper, and a good piece of sugar and a little salt. And when the onions be thorough boiled, beat in the yolk of an egg with verjuice, and put it in your pot and serve it upon sops. If you will, poach eggs and lay upon them. So that's just essentially boiled onions with raisins and vinegar. That's from about 1450 or so. And then our own Cindy Renfro in Take 1,000 Eggs and More has a wonderful onion recipe. It's from the Harleian manuscripts. It's called Pickle for the Mallard. And it says, for our own while, this is, you know what? I'm not even going to try reading this recipe for you. It's so Middle English. Oh, there it is. Sorry, Cindy. Here's the translation. Take onions and hew them small and fry them in fresh grease and cast them into a pot. Add fresh broth of beef, wine, powder of pepper, cinnamon, and the drippings of the mallard. and let them boil together a while. I'd take it from the fire and cast thereto mustard a little and powder of ginger, and let it boil no more, and salt it and serve it forth with the mallard. So this is a wonderful recipe for a sauce to serve with ducks that I'm going to try next time I cook a duck. But my favorite onion recipe comes from the medieval kitchen. Oh, sorry, it's backwards. This is one of the best books I've ever found for reading, for getting recipes redacted. So we have the roast onion salad. Take onions and cook them in the embers, then peel them and cut them across into longish thin slices. Add a little vinegar, salt, oil, and spices, and serve. That's a Tuscan recipe. And it's basically, you roast onions, you dress them, slice them and dress them with olive oil, vinegar. And I use the fine spices, which is ginger, pepper, saffron. What else is in there? I put grains of paradise in mine because I like them. And various fine spices, the real expensive good ones, pepper. And you just, put on a little good olive oil, the vinegar of your choice, and a sprinkling of spices. And it is so good. I've made that many times. So why? Oh, one more historical thing. It's not in our period. And well, actually, does anyone have any questions so far?
There's nothing in the chat so far. If folks want to ask questions, you're free to unmute and do that.
Yeah, please do.
You said that onions are the only vegetable ever cooked with meat, and I take exception to that because I'm reading Liver Fort right now, and there's a whole section of stuffed vegetables that are stuffed with meat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said it in European cooking. And well, I'm thinking, and I'm talking more of stews, the stew type things. Stuffed vegetables got really popular in the Ottoman.
Liver Fort is French, 1555.
Okay, well, that is one that I don't have, and I thank you for letting me know that. But it is, in general, what I was talking about is stews, and I'm sorry I did not make that clearer. I'm sorry, I just saw a question on the chat and I lost it. Lisa, do you see that?
I can read it for you. It's were there different names for onions in medieval text strokes recipes?
For the most part, they're called onions. Sometimes they're spelled YNION rather than ONION. But I've never, it's not like eggs are called errands or turnips are called grapes. I've never really seen anything that, wasn't basically onions. I said, our onions have been with us a long time, and, we don't, they're called something else in French and they're called something else in Italian. But they're not in English recipes, or recipes that have been translated into English. I've only seen them as onions. Okay, are there any more questions at this point? Okay, well, just one more little historical thing, and I will be going on. The New World had its own types of onions. They have wild onions. Still today, we have ramps. I'm sorry, the question was, were shallots used in recipes? I've never seen a recipe specifically calling for shallots. I certainly haven't seen all the recipes there are. I'm not a botanist, so I don't know a whole lot about the cultivation of onions. I was in the porridge class yesterday, and they were talking about, what they're growing the various months of the year. And they don't really mention shallots per se, but they don't say it, because they, come on, that looks like an onion. They don't necessarily separate them out. So I can't really say. It's not like today's cooking where they say, mince a shallot and put it raw into your salad dressing, because it's, mild and tasty and sort of garlicky. It wasn't like that. So I don't really have an answer for you, but I haven't seen it. So anyways, we have the ramps that anyone who's on the East Coast, well, not the East Coast, Appalachia and Michigan, the upper tier states, probably know about ramps. They look like, they sort of look like this. This is the bulb onion. They're just a single blade, and they have a little like rooty thing on them. And they are supposedly delicious. They do not grow in Southern California, and I have never tasted them, but my sister is moving to South Carolina, so I'm hoping to visit her one spring and try them out. But these onions were brought by the Europeans to the New World. But they had their onions before, and the city of Chicago takes its name from the Indian word Chikagwa, which means onion that smells rancid. Apparently, there were a lot of ramps and various wild onions growing in the area that we know as Chicago, and they took their name from it. And I guess in the spring and summer when they're ripe, they do smell pretty rancid. So that's what I have for history, and I'll have more in the handout. I didn't get a chance to finish my handout, but it will be up on the website in a week or two, and it'll have more interesting history stuff in it. But we're going to talk a little bit about onion science and why onions are so ubiquitous in various cuisines. Mostly it's umami. Onions have lots of it. Umami is that the fifth taste that our tongues are able to discern. There's salt, sweet, bitter, and sour, and then there's umami, which translates mostly as savory. Onions have lots of it. Only really mushrooms and tomatoes beat them out for umami zing, and garlic has much more umami than onions do, but they both have a lot, and they're glutamates. And it's like if you grew up in the 60s, there was a product called Accent that advertised it makes all your food taste better, and it came in like a salt shaker, and you sprinkled it on all your food and you made it taste better. And that was 100% sodium glutamate, or MSG, sodium monoglutamate. And they realized later that so much MSG wasn't good for you, and now it's not used. And in fact, they brag that things are MSG free. But a little glutamate is a good thing, according to our tongues. Garlic has about 100 milligrams of umami or glutamates per 100-gram serving, which is about 3.5 ounces. And onions have 50 to 70 milligrams per 100 grams, depending on the variety. And if you've ever watched a Dutch oven full of onions caramelized down to nothing, you know that onions are mostly water, about 85%. The remainder of onions is cellulose, sugars, and a trace amount of vitamins and minerals, as well as oils. Umami makes things taste savory, and things that are savory, make other savory things taste better. So that's why the onions are cooked with meat in our medieval recipes. They are, they're boiled with meat. So the meat takes on the umami of the onions and garlic and leeks. So that's basically why we like onions so much. They make our food taste better. They're, they have some nutrition, mostly, the fiber, and trace vitamins and minerals, like I said, but they're not a health food. I guess that's why they're so overlooked and so ubiquitous, because no one ever thinks of them. It's like they're always there. So, why bother to mention them? And in fact, a lot of books don't mention them at all. A lot of the books describing various vegetables. There's one called Vegetables A to Z that has, it has Japanese bunching onions, which are not a seppa, but they look just like green onions, but they don't have any of the seppas because they're so ubiquitous and the author couldn't find anything new and interesting to say about them. Let's see, so where are we looking at time? Okay, well, I'm getting to the end of what I have. So I thought I would have a little more stuff, and if I had finished my handout, I probably would. But I'm going to tell you Onion's deepest, darkest secrets, as I said earlier. And it answers the question, why do onions make us cry? And Shakespeare has a wonderful quote from All's Well That Ends Well. Mine eyes smell onions, I shall weep anon. And this is one of my favorite things because it's a memory from my dad. My dad was a chemist for many years, and then he became a lawyer. And one day we're having lunch in a deli, and out of the blue, for no reason I can remember, he's telling me why onions make us cry. And the reason is sulfur. Onions have sulfur in them. And when we cut them, we break open their cells and we release an enzyme called alanase. And it reacts with amino acids to produce the sulfides, the sulfur compounds. As they are lighter than air, they float up and they get in our eyes, especially if you're leaning over your cutting board. Their skin isn't sensitive enough, so it doesn't hurt your whole face. Are you asking for my website personally or the symposiums? In case our skin is not sensitive enough to really feel it, but it gets in our eyes. Back when I wore contact lenses, onions never used to bother me at all, but since LASIK, I, cry with the best of them. I try, not to bend over the cutting board because the sulfur compounds tend to go straight up. They dissipate a little bit, but they tend to go straight up. And or wear glasses, not regular glasses, because they get under, the pesky sulfides get under those. But sometimes people wear goggles. Christopher Kimball once on America's, back when he was back in America's Test Kitchen, came out and he was wearing huge scuba goggles. So he was able to totally avoid the onions because, of course, that seals around your face. So there's a related problem to why they make us cry, and that's why do they make our breath stink and our hands stink and our cutting boards stink? And the answer to that is oil. You don't think of onions as being oily, but they do have an oil. They have a fixed oil and an essential oil. A fixed oil is a lipid that is liquid at room temperature, and they're used for soaps and lotions and things because they're easily absorbed by our skin. So an onion has that too. And then it has the essential oil, and that's where all the pungency is, the compounds and the things that they're mostly sulfur again that make them zing, and that's in the essential oil. And what happens is the fixed oil gets into our skin and it takes the essential oil along with it. So we end up with stinky hands and the insides of our mouth coated with these stinky compounds. The solution for our hands and cutting boards is a paste of baking soda. That's the best way I found to get rid of the smell. You just pop some baking soda on your hands, add a little water, and rub them together. And scrub your cutting board with it. As for breath, that's why God created mints. So that is all I really have. Again, I will have some more for you in the handout, which will get finished this week, I promise. And I just want to know if there are any questions. I guess we could stop recording at this point, Lisa.
Okay.
People can ask questions.